afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Cheka-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Welcome to our Fall Book Sandwiched In series. We ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers who so graciously share their time and talent with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year. We are live streaming the formal portion of today's program to the library's YouTube channel at Rochester Public Library, New York. If you need to access the induction loop service in the auditorium, please adjust your hearing aid to the T switch. Today, we need to share some sad news as we note the sudden passing this week of Joseph Flaherty, founder of Writers and Books, Rochester's literary center. Joe founded Writers and Books in 1981 and led the organization until his retirement in 2016. He brought nationally acclaimed authors to town and presented many community programs, including reading and writing camps for youth and the annual Rochester Reads, which, as many of you know, was held here at Central Library from 2014 through 2022 and was sponsored by FFRPL. And recently, Joe served on the committee that plans our Book Sandwiched In series of reviews. Joe Flaherty's passing is a devastating loss for his family and friends, as well as a tremendous loss for the organization he founded and the community of writers and readers he fostered. FFRPL expands the library's impact. Our nonprofit organization raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. And here are just a few examples. One way we raise funds is from book sales on site at RPL's bookstore and online. Our special fall book sale will be held from Monday, October 21st through Thursday the 24th, and then Saturday, October 26th, and proceeds from book sales benefit the library. We present programs like today's Book Sandwiched In review. We support special projects and exhibits like the Art of the Book and Paper exhibit now on view across the street in the Rundell building. The reception for Art of the Book and Paper is tomorrow from 5:30 to 7 with presentations and artist awards, which will begin at 6. This year's show features 92 pieces by 62 artists representing 23 states and 5 countries. And FFRPL is a founding sponsor of the exhibit. FFRPL helps to create specialized spaces as well. Recently, we helped support the Maplewood branch's temporary move to the former Holy Rosary Church and Mary's Place on Lexington Avenue. And you can learn more about Maplewood's 2-year renovation at the library's website, rockcitylibrary.org. And finally, FFRPL purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the library, such as the at-home storytime kits now available for checkout at Parma Public Library. Each kit contains books, interactive items, and early literacy information. The kits are in convenient backpacks to be used by families, caregivers, and classes. And FFRPL funded this project through the Harold Hacker Grants for the Advancement of Libraries. Today, Jim Bader will review Things That Go Bump in the Universe, How Astronomers Decode Cosmic Chaos by C. Renee James. Things That Go Bump in the Universe follows astronomers worldwide who are exploring everything from the very first explosions in the universe to the dark energy that threatens it. Each chapter explains a different type of astronomical event using metaphors and stories. Jim Bader is director of the RMSC's Strassenberg Planetarium, an astronomy and space enthusiast, a planetarian, and a lifelong learner. Please join me in welcoming Jim Bader to our podium.
All right, that was exciting. I had to get your attention to make sure everybody was awake for this. Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate that. This is such a cool opportunity. Before I start, I'm just kind of curious, how many of you fully read the book? Everybody, no one. A few of us. Well, that's okay, because I'm going to talk to you about it. It's a fantastic piece of literature, and it covers a lot of important things, and it's a great refresher. If you're interested in space, astronomy, and the universe, and particularly, I think it starts by talking about some of the more Hollywood aspects, the action-packed portions of astronomy. There's lots of things in astronomy that are wonderful and relaxing and calming, and there are things that people don't like to think about. I think described in the title, things that go bump in the universe. But just a little bit about me, I think to start with, I think this would be important just so that you have some background. I'm new to Rochester, and as many of you probably know, I hope you know, Rochester is home to one of the world's great planetariums. It's not just a regional planetarium, but this is a big deal among planetariums all over the planet. And that is basically all I knew about Rochester, embarrassingly enough, before the previous director, Steve Fentress, announced his retirement, and he did it in the planetarium community, and immediately I was trying to find out, is Rochester right for me? And I think so. So since taking over, my first day was actually Halloween of last year, so it was quite spooky for me. But since taking over, it has just been a fantastic roller coaster of excitement and hard work and tons of payout. And the reason I say this is because I can't say thank you enough to the community that has been just so welcoming the entire time and constantly supportive and interested and just what appears to me to be genuinely caring. It means a lot, and this is part of it. So thanks for bringing me on and staying interested. My career is planetariums. This means, while I do have a degree in physics, my specialty is science communication. It's taking those, I would say, sometimes difficult, but always thrilling topics and bringing them to people who maybe are too worried about the maths or the other things to dip their toes in. So that's how I'll be approaching this review, is as a science communicator, and how I see that happen. Not exactly as a physicist, although that will be in the back of my mind the entire time. It can't go away. Oh, I can raise the podium. I'm sorry, this is taking a lot of time, but this is quite nice. Now I don't have to bend over a bunch. Okay, let's jump into this. So the book, as just a quick overview of the title, this book, it hands you a bunch of really difficult topics in what feels like, to me, that's important, a relatively easy manner. So a lot of really scary terms and explanations, and I think it is done really well, where it brings it to readers in a way that all of us can take a bite without fear of what's inside. The problem with my view is that I spend countless hours having conversations with scientists who are studying this stuff, reading literature, answering questions of the general public. So I'm constantly wrapped up in this, and I think that's a bit of an issue because that perspective can sometimes be a little skewed. It can have some bias. It seems easy to me. So those of you who have kind of paged through it, or whether you have or not, I'm really curious if you do go through it, if you feel like the concepts are easily explained or not yourselves. But from my perspective, I think C. Renee James did a phenomenal job of taking these very difficult things, slicing them up into totally reasonable portions that you can consume and learn about. So that's important from my perspective. Now, the topic in question is the title of the book, Things That Go Bump in the Universe. I'm putting an emphasis on the word bump, and I'll come back to that. Because it's the Hollywood aspect, it's the action-packed portion. The problem with jumping right into a subject like this, and I've already harped on it a few times, is that you really need to lay out the scaffolding of these difficult concepts, or it's just not fair. You either need to see the scaffolding. How do you get from being just a sky watcher to understanding the mechanics of some of the most, energetic explosions in the universe? You need a lot of points between them. If you don't give them to readers, then the reader themselves should have them, like scientific papers often just expect that you have them to be able to interpret them. But presenting these things, like those unimaginably powerful foes, the book calls them, pretty exciting terminology used throughout the book, it's just really not fair without that explanation. The general public and people who are interested in astronomy and the sciences, they deserve that. They really need that, that little window into how science works. I think the catch with displaying a lot of these things is not that when you're writing about difficult topics, you intend to pull back, or you don't intend to pull back the veil to explain people how science works, is that sometimes it's just easier to give people a short answer rather than a very descriptive set of scaffolding to explain it. So I think what I'd like to push on is a simple question. At the end of the show today, somebody could come to me and ask me, how far away is the moon? And that's a lot more difficult to answer than you would expect. Because do you want to know how far it is right now? Or 5 minutes from now? Do I need to explain the elliptic orbits? And that sometimes the moon is farther away and sometimes it's closer, and that doesn't always stay the same? No, probably what I would do is give you the average. I would say it's about 240,000 miles away. But when I did that, I kind of shut the window on the explanation of what's really happening, because there's an obnoxious little anecdote that you hear from physicists and many other scientists, and that is, well, technically, and that's true in this case, well, technically, it's a little bit more complicated than just 240. That average isn't even correct. It's probably closer to 238, but I just rounded it up to the next 10,000. This is what I mean, and this happens through all the sciences in all aspects. There's always particulars and very peculiar explanations that sometimes need to be explained, and scientists and science communicators, we shut that window because, well, sometimes it's easier, and sometimes you might be making more of a mess by giving somebody a full description than just telling them a quick answer. So this happens through the book in some cases, but in a lot of it, C. Renee James does a great job of explaining these difficult concepts and making it. This whole thing that I said, it really harps on something I say several times a month. And I'm going to read it for you for some reason I can't explain. But science is not a book of facts. It's a toolbox. It's a way of learning about the world. And that is so wildly true. You expect science to be a book with answers, and it's not. It's much more like a tool. And throughout this book, from beginning to end, James lets you in on not only the tools, and this is my favorite part, but those wonderful stories on how the tools came into existence, and the wild stories of the people who figured out how to harness them. And this is from the very beginning to the end, whether it's looking at the Aboriginal people and their opening chapter on how they were seeing supernova and how they were interpreting that themselves and leaving behind artwork, to the very end when we're talking about LIGO and gravitational waves and the future of cosmology. This book really is, it's a step-by-step guide on how we all came to know about these bumps in the seemingly infinite, deep, dark depths of outer space. Now, onto the bumps. What does bumps mean? I love this. This is so wild. It's the most exciting terms in all of astronomy. So I'm going to read some of these words. They're very funny. Quasar, pulsar, white dwarf, neutron star, black hole, nova, supernova, supergiant, hypergiant, and magnetar. All of these names sound exciting and action-packed, and even some of them strange. Magnetar. Does anybody here, how many of you know what a magnetar is? A few of us? Okay, we'll talk about it maybe later. So I get to say this all the time because it's true, but astronomers are the absolute worst at coming up with names. The creativity among astronomers is tremendously horrible. And I'll give you some examples. This group of names is not one of them, okay? A lot of those are quite exciting and what you hoped for, but the explanation of these names is always quite silly. If I start with something close to us, like the moon, the line that separates the light side from the dark side, you would say where the light terminates is called the terminator line. This is a name that is very literal. It doesn't have an Austrian accent, unfortunately. But we can go a little farther away. Did anybody see Aurora last night? No. This is, well, there was a really high index. I didn't go outside and see it myself. Did anybody by chance catch them on May 10th of this year? We want to see. So this whole year has been packed with high indexes from the sun. That's because there's lots of activity on the sun. And skywatchers have known about the sun's activity and the connection to aurora for a long time. They didn't understand the mechanisms that made it happen. We don't 100% understand them today. But we have known about the activity on the surface of the sun in the forms of these little spots that are on the sun. And you think to yourself, what would I call those little spots on the sun? Their actual name is sunspots. The storm on Jupiter is called the Great Red Spot. That's its actual name. It's not, it's just a spot in the solar system. And this goes on and on constantly. But names like quasar and pulsar realistically are the same thing. So quasar is just an amalgamation of a few terms, quasi-stellar radio source. So it's a radio source that seems like a star, but you don't see it as a star, so that's weird, no visible light explanation of it. And quasi-stellar radio source got shortened into quasar. And pulsar is the same way. It's a pulsating radio source, and you just slam that together and you get pulsar. And then you have continued explanations of those, and that extends to big and small stars. This is always quite funny, but our sun is a yellow dwarf. It's a small star, so we say dwarf. If it was a really big star, like Betelgeuse in the constellation of Orion, it would be a giant, and they get bigger, and you would say it's a supergiant. And then you might say, what do you call stars that are even bigger than supergiants? Hypergiants. And it's just on and on and on. And this book mentions so many of those, but you really get to focus on the bumps that are the action-packed Hollywood versions of names that we love so much. Right out of the gate, and I just have to mention this because it's almost in every piece of literature that talks about astronomy is the mention of this book right here. If you haven't at least flipped through this piece of literature, I imagine there's several copies of it here in the library. You should. I wouldn't read too detailed into it anymore because a lot of the facts, those answers are no longer accurate, but the science, the tools are still there, and it does such a wonderful job. And C. Renee James mentions this right out of the gate, that it had a huge impact, as it did on people from all over the place, the spectrum, many generations. And if it didn't have an impact on the astronomers, it had an impact on whoever the astronomers were interested in. So it is just nonstop, and we love it. And Carl Sagan did a wonderful job of communicating difficult topics across many generations. Speaking of scaffolding, it's important to get to this quote. I don't know if you all can read this up there, but I'm going to read it to you no matter what. So this is an important quote to me that I quote pretty often. It's by Sir Isaac Newton. It is, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the backs of giants. This is usually attributed to Sir Isaac Newton, although I think there are some remnants of it coming from before him. And it's a bit of a controversial quote. It was found in a letter sent to Sir Isaac Newton's rival, Robert Hooke. If there are any physicists in the room, there's a wonderful background between these two scientists. They were not fans of each other, but probably helped, that rivalry helped to push them to greater extents, which probably give us a lot more science. And nevertheless, this is really important. That is the scaffolding, that all of this science seems so impossible to explain the inner workings of the core of a star, this thermonuclear fusion that's happening. You can't get to that level without having a bunch of people before it. I was a little disappointed to not see this quote drop until chapter 14, so right around the halfway point of the book. But either way, it still finally made it in there in some form or another, whether C. Renee James did it intentionally or not, we'll never know. But it is something that is a constant theme in this book. You couldn't have gotten somewhere without somebody else doing something important first, and that happens a lot. The book talks about a lot of interesting characters. As soon as I opened the book, I knew that it was going to mention the gentleman on the left. His name is Fritz Zwicky. And I knew immediately from as soon as she asked if I would do the review and I looked at the book, I'm going to somehow use a picture of Fritz Zwicky in this presentation. So I kind of started this whole slide just to do that. But this picture is such a Such a wonderful picture. Fritz Zwicky is a Swiss astronomer who worked at Caltech for most of his career and did a ton of stuff. I say astronomer, I really should say physicist, maybe cosmologist, maybe astrophysicist, but Fritz Zwicky did a huge amount of stuff for physics, however you want to look at it. And this covered a lot of things, from understanding the mechanics of what happens in stars when they end their lives, thinking about black holes, and the connection, I think, which is one of the most radical from a normal standpoint, is that the mechanics that make the biggest, most terrifying bumps in the universe are so deeply rooted in the tiniest things that we understand. Atomic particles and subatomic particles, they really are the reason these large things work, and you can't understand what happens in the biggest sense without connecting it to the smallest things. And this is such a, James does such a fantastic job throughout this book doing that, connecting these to the tiniest things over and over again to give us more of these wonderful views into the scaffolding, into how science really works. Fritz Zwicky had a huge impact on this book, but also completely not mentioned in the book at all, which was confusing to me. Has anybody heard of dark matter? He said that term first. It was coined by him. He did it in German, so it was dunkle Materie, but either way, he coined it first. And I think that's always really important. And of course, he just looks ridiculous in that photo. He's known for being quite obnoxious and had no problem telling everybody they were wrong immediately when he saw something they did wrong. Next, another important figure in the book, right out of the gate, in one of the opening chapters, she is at the Harvard Observatory explaining some of the work that Henrietta Leavitt did there at the Harvard Observatory. Huge, tremendous work. Henrietta Leavitt is somebody who almost got a Nobel Prize, just barely, and the excuse the Nobel Committee gave was that she had died, so they weren't going to give it to her. It's another reminder of how women throughout the sciences and history don't typically get the credit that they deserve. Henrietta Leavitt, mostly a computer, somebody who sits there and does calculations and tedious work, but also the computers are some of the people who found many of the most important things throughout history and astronomy, because astronomy is a tedious job. People like to get into astronomy for the pretty pictures, but you usually stick around for the magnets. She is somebody who did the tedious work, got the things done, and discovered these interesting characteristics of things called Cepheid variables, which allowed us to understand distances out into the universe in ways that we hadn't before. Up until that point, we really just had to use parallax effect, which you guys can do just with your thumb. Closing one eye and open it, you can see how stuff behind it moves relative to your thumb. That's kind of how we looked at distances in the universe. And when she opened up the gate of the Cepheid variables, all of a sudden people were in complete disbelief at how wildly large the universe was. And that's a huge deal. She probably should have gotten the Nobel Prize before her death, but regardless. Next, Sir Isaac Newton, important to this book for many reasons, and mentioned just lightly, mostly because Sir Isaac Newton started spectroscopy, and that's how most all of real astronomy and astrophysics is done. It's using the spectral data. When light that is white or of any kind passes through a prism, a medium of sorts, certain wavelengths can be slowed down. So you can break light up into different wavelengths, which allow you to learn not just what the material is made of. All atoms have different signatures, but you can also use that data to understand its mass and its distance. Is it moving toward you or away from you? You take into account the Doppler effect. Is it red shifted and moving faster away, or is it blue shifted and moving closer to you? And nothing in astronomy could have been done without that finding. So Sir Isaac Newton's explanation, super important to all of astronomy. And finally, mentioned in the book many times, is Edwin Hubble. Many of you probably know Hubble at least through the Space Telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, which defined a generation in terms of astronomy and the beautiful images that were cast by it. But Hubble also noticed something about all of those distant galaxies. They were all redshifted, which meant they were all moving away. Everything that was far was moving away. So this opened up this new explanation that the universe was expanding. That alone is a bump in the universe. It's terrifying. If it's expanding, will it slow back down? Which is really what he thought. He thought if you throw a ball into the air, it doesn't continually go straight up. It will come back down. Forces will act on it. And the universe will be the same way. Even Albert Einstein accepted his idea and said, yeah, I think that the universe will have to slow down in its expansion. It's probably not going to continue at this high rate forever, and retracted some of his early ideas. So even Einstein said the universe will probably slow down. This little variable that I have probably doesn't need to matter. It's probably zero. And it took a whole term out of it. And the book really takes that idea and explains that's not the case. And this is where stuff gets really, really recent. 1998 is when we had the evidence that said the universe wasn't just expanding at a constant rate, but that it was accelerating. So instead of throwing the ball and having it come back down, like Hubble would have imagined, the ball went up and it just got faster and faster, and it is blasting away. And what does that mean? That's the big bump. Or I think, as many cosmologists would call it, the big rip. When the universe ends, not because stuff goes away, but because if it's expanding at an accelerating rate, stuff will be moving so fast away from you that it will be moving faster than the speed of light. So that classic phrase, nothing can go faster than the speed of light, space is nothing. So that expansion of the universe could, and that means that maybe all the stars and galaxies and so on and so forth will be moving away from us at such a rate that the light can't reach our eyes, so we can no longer observe them. We're very fortunate to live at a time where that's not the case, where we can observe things and gather a lot of data. Hopefully we can gather enough data to answer even more of those questions, the weird connections between how gravity works on a large scale and how it seems to not make sense in field theory in the way people would hope. So those connections are still in the future. But either way, it's pretty exciting. It was talked about throughout the book, and it's such a wonderful journey that is also action-packed and super recent, which feels really good. One more person, and this one is especially exciting for me. As a young person being interested in music and physics, seeing this on a shirt. This is an album cover of an album by Joy Division. It's called Unknown Pleasures. I didn't understand it, but it seemed cool in the music community. So I was interested in it. I had to get a shirt with this on it. It wasn't until after that you realize that this is not just a cool piece of art that's on an album cover. This is incredible work done by Jocelyn Bell Burnell. This is the very first viewings of some of the first pulsars. So in the book, it's talking about pulsars are these weird, constant noises in radio, and they didn't make much sense. Jocelyn Bell Burnell was not really respected too much in the community because probably she was a woman, not because she wasn't incredibly talented. She decided to make her own instrument to listen to these radio signals, or to just listen to radio signals, I should say. So she creates her own enormous instrument where she lays out all of this cabling all over campus at Cambridge University, and makes this huge mess of things. And then this is where it gets really exciting. She picks up something, doesn't know what it is, and colleagues kind of scoff at her, like she thinks it's aliens. There's a constant repeating radio signal. So she jokingly, kind of in spite of it, named these pulsars early on LGM, or Little Green Men. And labeled them that way. And so we're looking at some evidence of these little green men here on the screen, and these little waves. Now, that's not really what it was, of course. I think the saddest part of Bell Burnell's story is that she didn't get a Nobel Prize. Instead, her PI gets the Nobel Prize, which feels a little bad. A lot of it bad, I would say, in the end. But it's still really important, I think, to note that she also absolutely, discovering pulsars, deserved to get a Nobel Prize as well, and didn't do it. Quick anecdote about Jocelyn Bell Burnell. I bring this up there because of this. The Strassenberg Planetarium opened in 1968, just actually 3 days ago. It was been 56 years, so September 14th, 1968. Jocelyn Bell Burnell's father was an architect who opened another planetarium in 1968, just a few months prior, called the Armagh Planetarium. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but another great planetarium. This one just in Northern Ireland. So I say that because it's always fun to find the weird connections to other planetarians or planetariums when they have the opportunity. So also a planetarium, and I have to imagine she certainly had an effect on her father as her research came out just before that planetarium opened. Okay. Now, it took a long time for this to happen because when you see, when I saw the cover of this book, it has on the cover a depiction of a black hole. So I thought it's going to open right up with black holes. And I was disappointed to learn that the whole concept of the book was relatively calm. There's almost no mention of impending doom or destruction throughout the book, as if you look at the cover and thinking about what the title is, you would expect that. It's pretty relaxed. As a matter of fact, it didn't even mention black holes until chapter 13. So that's halfway through the book before you even hear a mention of the word black hole, and it's in a real nonchalant way. However, as I have quoted here a chunk of the book, things definitely take a turn. And in chapter 15, they will point break. I'm just going to read this one quote. It's a little ridiculous. This is in regards to gamma ray bursts in the previous few lines and discussing a particular exciting nebula in the sky known as Eta Carina. This is a really interesting six-star system. It's millions of times more luminous than our own sun, and you just have to read the book, I think, to get the gist of it. But the quote, "Of course, astronomers have tried to figure out exactly how the story would play out if Eta Carina had us in its sights. Just in case, spoiler," and this is where James is just ruthless in saying, "Nobody, not even the dog, survives. From a mere 7,500 light years away, give or take, a foe of gamma ray energy would destroy our ozone layer, sandblast the surface of our planet, and all of the life on it with bizarre particles called muons. Don't worry, I will say to you, this is extraordinarily unlikely. It has to be aimed directly at us, okay? That is not how we understand that. We don't have anything to worry about. But there may be other things out there in the universe that we don't see that might be aimed at us. So you could worry about that if you really wanted to. But I don't think it's anything to mention. And this is something that in the book she talks about often, which is always funny, that if you were to watch a documentary that covered these topics, they would ask the scientist, and the scientist would say to you what I probably just said, which is, you don't have anything to worry about. And then the narrator would come in, and I'm almost quoting the book. But what if it did? So that's how books like these get sold, and that's important part of this. You know, if you're going to get people interested in astronomy, you sometimes got to give them the exciting stuff and hit them with the headline if we know anything about social media or the news, right? So I think pretty interesting and a little wild. I hope I'm doing okay on time. I don't see a timer, so okay. So just as a recap on things, almost on accident, it feels, as she's telling her story throughout this book, C. Renee James, when you hear her or read her describe how she is at the Harvard Observatory looking at the glass plates from Henrietta Leavitt that she used to find these Cepheid variables and learn about them, she describes this feeling of excitement unintentionally. She doesn't have to describe that she feels a certain way, but as you're reading it, you know that's what she's feeling. And this is so impactful to me specifically because you can read that giddiness, that excitement that we all feel about whatever our topic is that we like to read about, where you feel the vibrations and you're sitting there. Me even just describing it right now, I have goosebumps. So if you wanted to see those and you want to come see a planetarium show, all of our staff feel that same way, and you'll hear them talk as if they are vibrating because they get to talk to you about the thing that makes them most excited. And being around this historic chunks of information, you know, getting to see the Mathematica Principia myself, or I'm saying that backwards, but it's Latin, whatever. You know, there are these moments where you get to be around history or meet a certain person, and it is just reading her writing about these things and the excitement that she feels, that giddy excitement, is just wonderful. So I will say that in the book she describes, I think to me, that journey of finding that thing that makes us all tick. Some of us are lucky enough to have arrived at it. I think myself, I know what makes me tick, but it's not a specific thing in particular. It's not a finish line for me. It's absolutely the journey. And just staying on that path of making me tick, you can read the entire time that C. Renee James is on that path, and she's excited about every turn and twist in the story of how we learned about those bumps in the universe. Because like for me, and many people, it's probably the journey that is the thing that makes you tick. And getting to have a quick glimpse into someone else's journey, for me, throughout the book was nothing short of heartwarming. Just page to page, you consumed the book for sure. And I'll say it one more time, this is absolutely a step-by-step guide on how we came to know of all the bumps out there in the universe and the human's journey of seeing those. So, yeah, that's my thing. I think I talked for too long, but thank you. You should, if you haven't, please read it.